What's up, guys? I'm Chad Barnes, and welcome to the channel. Here, it's all about real car talk, from simple fixes to smart driving tips and keeping your ride in top shape. If that sounds good to you, go ahead and give the video a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button and make sure you watch all the way through. There's a lot of good stuff coming. Let's get to it.
In the world, Avensis was very popular. In our country, it has always been in the shadow of Camry. In 2008, Avensis changed generation and got a more interesting design, but it did not solve the main problem. The third generation was built on the updated MC platform, which kept the main technical solutions, in particular, suspension schemes. With McPherson in front and multilink rear. The model reached us by the spring of 2009 in Russia, as well as in Europe. Cars were brought from Derbyshire, England. However, Avensis in our country was in a position of struggle for life. The reason was simple: the base version cost more than 850,000 rubles, being more expensive than many competitors, and the top version was up to 1.4 million rubles. For such money you could buy Camry, and well-equipped Passat, and Superb, and anything else. The Japanese tried to increase competitiveness by adding a base motor for 1.6 liters, with which the sedan cost a little more than 800,000 rubles. But it did not affect the price of other configurations in any way. As a result, sales amounted to a couple 3,000 units a year, and by the restyling of 2011 it became finally clear that Avensis has no future in Russia. So, we actually did not see the restyling. By 2012, the sales were finally curtailed. At that time there was only one average engine for 1.8 liters on sale, and the price of cars was in the range from 900,000 to 1.2 million rubles. The market for the model is small but stable. At the time of writing, there were just over 100 cars for sale on Avito. The market for the model is small but stable. At the time of writing, there were just over 100 cars for sale on Avito. For the cheapest, ask 500 to 600,000, and well-groomed copies do not hesitate to put up for $1 million and even more. Is it possible to buy Avensis as an alternative to Camry? Why the model has not become popular, and is it expensive to maintain? While the Camry has long been an investment in Russia, the Avensis has not been awarded this status, so the condition of the cars depends heavily on the owners. However, the age of 10 to 13 years is not critical. Despite the thin and fragile paintwork, the body is well preserved thanks to galvanization. Most of the problems are typical age-related. The edges of the arches suffer from chipping, the joints of the fenders with the bumpers get paint damage, and the front edge of the roof rusts from damage and moisture. The underbody is worth inspecting to assess future treatment and preservation work. Surface rust develops actively here, especially at the rear, including on the subframe. The hood, of course, is usually already repainted, and the trunk lid may have pockets of corrosion under the plastic molding and in the license plate recess. But the main specialty feature of the Avensis is the cracking of the metal of the front doors in the area where the stops are attached. The defect is quite massive, but, to the manufacturer's credit, it is still eliminated under warranty. The process of filing claims and replacing the entire doors has been debugged for years. Of course, there is an alternative option: strengthening of the restrictor fastening zone with plates and welding of cracks, but the majority of owners prefer to replace the doors at the dealer for free, rather than invest in improving their reliability. So the repainted hood and new doors on a 12-year-old car should not embarrass the buyer. It is more of an advantage than a disadvantage. However, you should still check the history of the car when buying it carefully. If you meet some kind of Renault Latitude, it is almost impossible to repair an Avensis after a serious accident, but with Avensis this situation is quite realistic. Prices for original body parts are expectedly high, but the range of non-original is wide and allows you to perform repairs with moderate costs. For example, the front bumper can be bought from 20 to 25,000 at the original price of 60, and front fenders are available for 15. Minus 30,000, although the original cost under 90. The rear bumper, however, has no analogs and costs under 70,000. But the hood can be bought for 35 to 70,000 instead of 100,000, and for the windshield there are enough substitutes from 8 to 15. To 30 to 35,000 rubles depending on the performance and availability of heating. Headlights in the basic version are halogen, and the optics can also be bought non-original for 12 to 30,000. With optional xenon is more difficult, the range is smaller and prices are higher. However, local dismantling shops are still able to help with spare parts, and for scarce parts you can turn to European ones. The running gear is not complicated either. A wide range of non-original parts allows to maintain the car with a moderate budget. Here, as we remember, McPherson is in front and Multilink at the back, and they are not capable to upset with expensive problems. Besides, maintainability of suspension is high. The front ball bearing is fastened on bolts and is standardly changed to a new one, which can be bought from 500 rubles. The lever is also available non-original at a price from 3 to 15,000 rubles. However, all budget options are sold just without a ball bearing. But the choice of both supports and silent blocks of the lever is the widest. Stabilizer struts cost from 400 rubles at the price of the original of 7,000 per piece. True, the hub unit both in front and behind is changed only in an assembly, but even here the choice of variants is wide, from 4 to 15,000 rubles, and the original will cost 10 to 15,000. Shock absorbers are also available from 3 to 10,000 rubles both in front and behind. However, the package for bad roads sharply reduces the choice, but it is not necessary to be limited by it. The rear multilever also pleases with assortment of non-original. You can buy the upper transverse lever for 3 to 6,000 instead of 10,000, lower links for the same 3 to 6,000 instead of 7,000, and for the expensive longitudinal lever there is a wide choice of silent blocks, as, however, for all other levers. So, inspection of the suspension is unlikely to be a reason to refuse the purchase, except for bargaining. With brakes in Toyota traditionally did not make any wisdom, there are usual disc single piston mechanisms with a floating bracket around the circle. The diameter of front discs is 295 mm, though there were 320 mm brakes, and behind 290 mm, and the mechanism of parking. Brake is not drum, but clamps the same caliper. By the way, it is the parking brake that is worth paying attention to when buying. An electromechanical handbrake is implemented here. And a new control unit installed above the rear axle costs 200,000. So it is better to check its work at once, not to dig through dismantling in search of replacement. Otherwise, consumables are inexpensive. The front brake disc can be bought from 2,000 at the price of the original in 8, and the rear, and at all from 1,000 rubles. Approximately the same amount will cost a set of inexpensive pads. The steering on the Avensis is electrically assisted. Apart from inarticulate feedback, the simple power-assisted design on the steering column is not inherently flawed, so it's worth just checking that it works correctly when you buy it. Jerks, jolts and uneven force when turning the steering wheel will indicate obvious problems, and it can be a reason for bargaining. Separately, the amplifier is not changed, so the matter usually ends with repair. Well, the mechanical rack is cheap to replace. You can ignore the six-figure price tag of the original, and a reconditioned assembly can be bought for 15 to 30,000. Gearboxes could be one of the stumbling blocks for the Avensis on its road to popularity. While the Camry was equipped with classic automatics, here the choice was reduced to mechanics and variators. Only diesel versions could boast an automatic, which were not offered in our country. So, those who for some reasons do not trust variators have to look for a car with manual transmission. Units EC60, EB60 are quite good, though they are not ideal. There are problems with shaft bearings, which begin to hum at a mileage of about 150,000 kilometers, and annoying trifles like vague work of the shift mechanism and defects of the release bearing. When buying it is definitely worth listening to the box on a hoist and check it on the move. However, the cost of repair here is still much lower than for the variator. Behind the marketing name Multidrive there are K-series units, K111, K310, K311. By the standards of CVT, these are quite good boxes, capable to pass 250 and more thousand kilometers in ideal conditions. But in practice, everything depends on the quality of service. To change oil every 40,000 kilometers, to warm up the engine and the box, to monitor the cleanliness of the standard heat exchanger. Or to be concerned about the installation of an additional one, to drive in a quiet style and not to tow trailers, means to delay the repair for the maximum possible period. But not every owner manages to do it. However, as long as the cones are alive, the repair still makes sense. Repair of the torque converter, check of the hydraulic block, and even replacement of the stowage belt. As we already know, diesel Avensis was not officially sold in Russia, but the gasoline lineup was presented in full. Actually, it consists entirely of motors of ZR series. Units 1ZR, FAE, 2ZR, FAE and 3ZR, FAE have a common cylinder diameter and differ only in piston stroke. As a result, there are three variants of working volume, 1.6, 1.8 and 2 liters, and the difference in power is small, 132, 147 and 152 horsepower, respectively. The design is similar to that of the ZZ engines in the previous generation Avensis all-aluminum construction with cast-iron liners. Chain-driven timing and distributed injection, except for the addition of hydrocompensators. However, the ZR series has fewer problems. The resource of the cylinder piston group is quite stable, and the timing chain also serves 150,000 kilometers and more. However, the motor still has a tendency to oil consumption. Often it is connected with the use of recommended low-viscosity oils or lodged rings. However, oil consumption usually does not indicate impending problems, usually even with it the engine passes its 250 to 300,000 kilometers, but you can still switch to more viscous oils and try to crack the rings. Another proprietary potential malfunction of FAE series motors is the valvomatic valve timing and valve lift control system, which allowed the use of throttle-free intake, as on BMW with their Valvetronic. Problems are usually related to the electronic part of the system that controls the movement of the rod when diagnosing its worth. Making sure the system is working correctly at different revs. And it is also worth remembering that the motor has no repair dimensions, that is, problems with the piston usually end up with a search for a contract unit. Having dealt with the technical component of the Avensis, one can understand why it lost the intra-brand struggle to the Camry, smaller dimensions, slightly lower price and variators instead of the hydro-mechanical boxes, which are favorite in Russia, made it a pale shadow of the older model. However, now on the secondary market the car has become more interesting. Dimensions of Class D are enough for the majority of people. Price injustice has leveled out, so that the only argument when buying a used copy remained the variator. Nevertheless, in the market you can still look for a well-groomed car from the first-second owner and with a mileage of about 150,000 kilometers, approximately like this if Autoteca confirms the mileage and accident-free history, and diagnostics will not reveal problems with the engine and variator. Avensis may well become that desirable Toyota on which you can drive for several years without major repairs. Well, if Avensis is seriously in your heart, you can consider one more option. The sharp rise in car prices revives the business of bringing cars from abroad, so you can find cars of 2015 to 2018 year of manufacture. That is, after the second restyling, on sale. Given that the technique has not changed much over the years, you can expand the budget to 1.7 to 2 million rubles and look closely at copies aged 4 to 5 years, including diesel. True, here, too, you should not count on miracles. The honesty of the declared mileage must be checked without fail. True, there is no unified database in Europe, but depending on the country of export you can check the car on local resources, and sometimes you have to pay for it. But risk in this case is not such a noble cause. In conclusion, while the Toyota Avensis III T270 offers a blend of comfort, reliability, and practicality, it ultimately falls short when compared to the Camry, especially in terms of performance and resale value. For $1 million rubles, potential buyers should weigh their options carefully. If you prioritize a spacious interior and a smooth ride, the Avensis may still be a worthy choice. However, if you seek a vehicle with a stronger reputation and better long-term value, the Camry is likely the smarter investment. Ultimately, the decision comes down to personal preferences and priorities, but it's essential to consider all factors before making your purchase.